Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Mather. I'm Associate Vice President with the Population Reference Bureau. I want to thank you for joining us for this webinar on net migration patterns as a tool to understand community change. I have a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have any questions that you'd like to submit to the presenters, there's a question box on the left-hand side of your screen where that's in your control panel, where you can type in questions, and I can feed those to the panelists at the end of the presentation. There's also going to be a very short survey that you should receive at the end of the webinar, and I encourage you to take the time to fill that out because it does help us plan for future webinars. And this webinar will be recorded, so if you need to leave early, you will be able to access it online, and it should be within 24 hours after the conclusion of this webinar that you'll receive an email that includes a link to that recording. And you're also free to email that to others who might be interested. So at this point, I'm going to introduce today's speakers. We have with us today Rochelle Winkler, who's Assistant Professor of Sociology and Demography at Michigan Tech University, and Catherine Curtis, who's Associate Professor of Community and Environmental Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And our two speakers are going to introduce a new website that they developed with a team of researchers where users can generate maps and charts of state and county level net migration using 6 decades of data from 1950 to 2010. These data are available by age, race, Hispanic origin, and gender for all U.S. counties. And I was fortunate enough to see this presentation or something like it at the PAA meetings and found it to be very useful. This webinar is sponsored by PRB Center for Public Information on Population Research with funding from the Eunice Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Rochelle Winkler. I just need to give me a minute here to switch the presenter. Okay, Rochelle, you're up.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mark. I hope everyone can see my screen. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. It's great to see that so many people are interested in these data and this website. And I want to start by recognizing all of the members of our project team who worked together to generate these data and to create this website. So this includes Ken Johnson at the Carsey Institute at the University of New Hampshire, Ching Ching, who's a graduate student at Princeton University, Paul Voss at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and our web designer, Jim Bowden, at the Applied Population Laboratory at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, in addition to Catherine and myself. So I'll begin this presentation by providing some background on the production and use of net migration data. And I'll show some examples of key age-specific net migration patterns that we commonly see for specific types of counties. And this is what we'll refer to as net migration signatures. Then I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who will give a tour of the website and discuss some of the key issues to keep in mind when we're working with these data. And I should mention, too, that you can access this website that we're talking about at www.netmigration.wisc.edu at any time. It's publicly available. So the topic of discussion today is net migration, or the difference between the number of in-migrants and the number of out-migrants in a particular geography. So populations can change through 3 different processes, as demographers all know. This is birth, death, and migration. And demographers refer to the difference between birth and death as natural increase. The difference between in-migration and out-migration is net migration, and that's what we're talking about today. I'm sorry. What we've done here with this data set is to estimate net migration for every county and for every state in the United States by 5-year age group, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, as Mark mentioned. And these data are important because they're useful for understanding how migration changes the population structure of different places and communities. They're also useful because they can be estimated almost free of error. They don't rely on any samples, but rather on population counts from the censuses and from administrative records, and so they are quite accurate. The data are commonly used in population projections, so a lot of applied demographers use these data as a means of projecting future county-level migration patterns. And they're also interesting and important because we can look at migrant selectivity. And what I mean by this is migrant selectivity refers to the fact that different types of people follow different migration patterns. So unlike other county-level data on migration patterns, the data that we're talking about today can be differentiated by key demographic characteristics, this age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin. And along these lines, age is probably the most important of these because, as you'll see, migration patterns vary dramatically by age. Although for certain counties and places, some of those other characteristics are very important as well. And finally, of course, I should mention the things that these data cannot do. So it's important to recognize that they only include net migration. This means that there's no estimates of the number of in-migrants or out-migrants, those individual flows we don't know. There's also no individual level data or understandings of why people move. There's also no data on the streams in terms of where migrants moved to or where they came from. But another key advantage of these data is that they are longitudinal. So the 2000 to 2010 data that we worked on most recently extend a long set of similar county-level net migration estimates by age, sex, and race dating back to the 1950s. All of these data sets are archived and in the public domain at ICPSR. And I should mention here, too, that the USDA Economic Research Service has been supportive and an integral partner in these efforts over the decades. And John Cromartie played an important role in this most recent data set by providing early support to get the project underway. I want to spend a moment now talking about the methods that we use to generate these data. And these methods are essentially a version of what's called the cohort forward survival method. Here, net migration is estimated as a residual of the difference between the population that was counted at Census 2010 and the expected population for 2010 had there not been any net migration. So we take the population at Census 2000, shown here, and we age those persons forward in time 10 years. We subtract out deaths and we add in births, and those births and deaths data are records that were provided by the National Center for Health Statistics. So through this process, we generate an estimate of the expected population at Census 2010. And this is, in other words, what the population would have been in 2010 absent any net migration. Net migration is then calculated as the difference between the observed population at Census 2010 and the expected population at Census 2010. And the net migration rate takes the estimate of net migrants divided by the expected population, and then we multiply it times 100 just for scaling purposes. And this is generally the process that's used to develop these data. So all in all, it's not rocket science. It's more like an accounting exercise, a big accounting exercise, and a huge data management task. You could imagine that the multitude of data that went into this are quite large, and so it's primarily about organizing, cleaning, and gleaning the data. We did have to make some adjustments to the census data, both at Census 2000 and Census 2010, for undercount and overcount and some errors that were in the census. We did also have to impute some birth and death data, some particularly by for certain race, ethnic, or sex categories. And the details on how we did these adjustments and the imputations can be found in the documentation file, which is found on the website under data details, which Catherine will show you in a few minutes. And in the end, what we have is a strong and robust set of estimates. I should mention, though, that they may underestimate net migration in some counties, particularly where there's more net in-migration of the older population, because migrant deaths, like if a migrant moves in, they're counted in the deaths if they die after they've arrived, and so we would not count them as a migrant. That's a small detail, and it only affects a small fraction of the data. So I want to move now away from the nuts and bolts of what the data are and how they're generated to how they help us to understand community change. In analyzing the data and starting to look at them, it's clear that age-specific patterns are remarkably stable over time for individual counties, and that there are clear types of counties that have similar age-specific patterns. Our research team refers to these stable patterns as migration signatures. And through these signatures, the demographic history of a county can be read much like from a population pyramid. We can look for patterns in the data between similar types of counties and for deviations in these patterns over time that are generally associated with meaningful social and economic change. Now I'd like to show you some of these common signatures and give you an opportunity to guess what county or type of county I'm showing data for. So what this chart shows is net migration patterns by age for each decade from the 1950s through 2010. And age refers to the age at the end of the decade. We have the youngest ages at the left and the oldest ages at the right. The solid zero line in the middle represents the break-even point, or everything above this line is net in-migration. Everything below is net out-migration. These are rates shown, and they're per 100 individuals in the expected population. The darkest green line here is for the 1950s. Then the 1960s is shown a little bit less dark green in 1970s. 1980s is the lightest blue color. 1990s is a little bit darker blue, and then the darkest blue line represents the 2000 to 2010 period. So for this county, and I'll let you guess what county you think it is. I don't know if I guess I'm not seeing some of the guesses that come through here. I thought that I might. This county experiences net in-migration among young adults, as we see here, and net out-migration at almost all other age groups. And this pattern has been pretty consistent over time, with the degree of in and out migration rising and falling each decade, so that in the 1970s and 1980s were kind of down decades for this county, or periods of less net migration. And this signature pattern is typical of a central city. And yes, this county is Cook County, Illinois, or Chicago. Now, let's look at a different type of county. You can see that the pattern is quite different here, with in-migration of families with children, and now the net out migration of young adults. So any guesses on what kind of county this would be? It's what we refer to as a classic suburban type county. I should ask you to notice here too that the scale on the left has changed, and with each county that I'll show, the scale is a little bit different. And so the net migration rates among people in their 30s here are really quite high, ranging from 50% to over 100% increase, or more than doubling of the population who were aged 30 to 34 in 2010, meaning that they were aged 20 to 24 at Census 2000. So in that period of their life, the number of people almost doubled in this county, or more than doubled in this county. And this is McHenry County, Illinois, which is in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. And what kind of county would you say this is? This is a county that represents a typical university county or college population. It's actually my hometown, or where I'm living now, Houghton County, Michigan, home of the Huskies and Michigan Tech University. And you'll see the extremely high rates of net in-migration among the college-age population, net out-migration of people after they graduate, and otherwise little impact across the ages. And this is particularly seen in more rural counties that have a strong university population, or in counties where the university really dominates. This is another pattern that's relatively typical. And this is what we would think of as a remote rural county, for the most part, that is seeing pretty extreme losses of young adults. And starting to see, over time, net in-migration among the retirement age population. And this county is Ontonagon County, Michigan. It's in the western Upper Peninsula. It's the county that neighbors me up here on Lake Superior. This county actually saw the greatest rate of population loss of any county in the state of Michigan between 2000 and 2010. And then finally, I want to show one more county. This is an interesting one. I'll give you a second to sort of think about what county this might be. And the hint here would be that the 2 decades that are generally showing net in-migration are the 1970s and the 2000 to 2010 period, whereas all the other decades are showing net out-migration across all the age groups. This county is an energy boom county, Richland County, Montana, on the Bakken oil shelf. So one of these that we see a real deviation in the pattern at pointing to some meaningful social and economic change. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who's going to give you a tour of the website and show you how you yourself can access the data and build these kind of charts and maps.
Great. Thank you, Rochelle. So I have the pleasure of demonstrating live our website for the net migrations, as you can see on your screen now. I'm going to walk you through a lot of the functionality and some of the details that you'll be hopefully moving through on your own. First, I want to point out the 3 tabs at the top. There are data details, data use, and links. The data details provide detailed information about the data themselves that Rochelle really discussed already, as well as information about our funders, our contacts, and references. Under the second tab here is data use. And here, what we've got is counts on various ways that these data have been used since their release to the public in April. And this page is actually updated continuously. And under that third tab, links, here we provide links to related sources and research using these data that will be continuously updated, just like the data use tab. So that's kind of background to this website, but the real functionality, what I want to spend most of our time on today, is on the panels on the left side here. The first one is the About panel, and here we've got information on the general scope of the project along with the appropriate citation. Here we've got that information, suggested citation for when you use the data, as well as our stamps of where we're all from. I want to spend quite a bit of time on the map feature, which seems to be one of the more popular features of our website. Within the map, we have several options, or several sections. The first is the changing the map variable. Then we have zooming capacity. We have a map legend, and then we have selected counties. So on the About page, there was a map showing the same color scale, and what we have here in the legend is our negative net migration, or loss, in orange, and then our most positive net migration in purple. And that color scheme is preserved throughout all maps that you'll see on the website. We're going to move through each of these functions in turn. First, under the change the map variable, here what we've got is the default 2000s, but we have other years available that cover the entire series. And then we also have various types of net migration rates, total, and then the age groups, as well as race-specific groups. And those vary by year, as we'll discuss. So under the change variable section, let's begin with the default 2000s. One of the benefits of these data, however, is that we have age-specific categories. So what I'd like to do is change it to our 55 to 74-year-old age group. And what we notice is the map updating, a little slowly, got a lot of users. And what is highlighted by selecting this age group is retirement migration. And the patterns that we see are actually representing some shifts showing the net in-migration in more rural retirement destination areas. Right? So for example, northern Wisconsin. If we change that age group to a younger population, age 15 to 29, for example, what we see is, in fact, almost the opposite pattern for our young adults. So again, one of the dimensions, a key feature of these data is this age-specific net migration estimates. Another useful dimension of the data series is the extensive time period that it covers. So what I'd like to do is demonstrate that first by going back to the total net migration rate and jumping all the way back to the earliest point in the data series, the 1950s. As the map updates, what you can see is that in the 1950s there was an exodus out of rural America, and the population was really heavily concentrated in urban areas, especially along, urban areas and then in areas like Florida and the Southwest. Am I going to update? Okay, there we go. So we see rural areas, and then we see a lot of orange in the rural areas, and again, the purple designating the high positive net migration in urban areas, and then in Florida, as well as the Southwest. Keeping our focus on the 1950s, we can also take advantage of some of the information on different race groups. Here in the 1950s, we have the option between white and non-white migration rates. Choosing the non-white, what we see here is evidence of the Great Migration. Sorry, this is taking a bit to upload. But in essence, what we see during this period is the Great Migration of blacks out of the South. And when we see this map, there we go. Every time I'm about to drop a still, it finally updates. But we see this very heavy out migration, or negative net migration in the southern region of the United States. And if we were to select the white migration rate, we would in fact have the opposite pattern demonstrated. But I'll leave that to you to explore on your own. Let's jump ahead to the 1970s. Still keeping the non-white population selected. And what we start to see here is the net migration of the non-white population starts to diffuse throughout the United States, including some areas within the South, which was an early signal of what is called the Great Return Migration. And then as we move forward to the 1990s, and then again in the 2000s, what we can actually see, and I'll leave it to your imagination given how slow this sucker is moving right now. But what we start to see is that the black net migration rates, we see a stronger signal of the return migration of blacks to particular areas of the South, and more of a patchwork pattern of urbanization among blacks within the South, rather than this max exodus out of the region as was seen in earlier decades. But one thing I do want to demonstrate in the tabs, and the map can update, however, quickly, but what we see here is that it automatically shifts to the black net migration rates. So in 1990 and in the 1990s estimates and the 2000 estimates where we have more refined race categories. So we now have white net migration rates, black net migration rates, and Hispanic net migration rates, as opposed to earlier decades where we have white and non-white. So taking advantage of some of the racial and ethnic specific detail that we have in the more recent estimates, let's examine the Hispanic population in the 2000s. So Hispanic net migration rate in the 2000s. What's really important to remember when we're looking at the website is that the maps here show the net migration rates. So while much of the map here looks very, very purple, these rates may be high because the denominator is small. This means that even a small number of net migrants can produce a really high rate if the expected population is low. We're going to return to this idea, this issue later in our conversation today, but for now, focusing on this map, what we see is the dispersion of the Hispanic population across the country and net outmigration of some of the most traditionally Hispanic areas, such as the Texas borderlands. And I want to show one final map to demonstrate a few features of the website. So going back to total net migration in the 2000s, let's zoom into Wisconsin, where summer has almost ended. You can scroll here, and we also have the capacity to scroll through by typing the letters, which is a feature that I find useful. So selecting Wisconsin, the map will update to a zoomed view of that state. You can also use the zooming feature right here, the pluses zooming in, the minuses zooming out. You can also use your mouse if you've got a scroller on that. That helps, or that also signals the zoom feature. If you left click onto your mouse and hold, you can hold it down to activate the hover feature to adjust what you're viewing. And you can also left click on a specific county to highlight that county's information. What I want to point out here is that when you select a county, it's automatically listed here in the selected counties section of the mapping portion. So we now have selection 1, Vilas County, Wisconsin, identified in the map and identified in the selected counties portion here. You can select up to 3 counties for comparison within the chart, and we're going to demonstrate the chart feature next. But before moving on there, I want to point out that you can export the map in 2 ways. Exporting the map in its view, you'd create a JPEG map, just simply by clicking there, and it opens it up in a new tab. The other way that you can export a map is actually by generating a map in your own mapping software by downloading the map data. And I'm going to talk about downloading the data elsewhere, but I just want to point that that is one of the features under the Maps section. Okay. The Charts section, if we bump there, because we had selected Vilas County in the mapping part of the website, Vilas County's net migration signature is revealed in the chart already. Okay. Here we have up to 3 counties that you can select, and then we can also choose the decades in the series. We've chosen the 2000s since that was the view that we were on in the maps, but we can select all decades, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And as opposed to the blue gradation that was shown in the stills that Rochelle presented, here we have reds, the red color ramp. So here what we are able to observe are these different, whether there is change within that county's migration signatures over time, as was demonstrated in the Richland County, Montana example. Looking at this, again, recall that the net migration rates are on the left side, and this varies, the scale varies depending on the county that you're looking at. Along the bottom are 5-year age groups, and each of the colored lines represents a different decade. And by scrolling over them, you can actually determine which one is which. When a line is above this bolded 0, that means that signals positive net migration, meaning that more people moved into the county at the age group than moved out, and the opposite holds when the line falls below that bolded 0 bar. And again, a reminder that rates are per 100. So in Vilas County, Wisconsin, it's actually a classic example of amenity or recreation destination or retirement type migration. So amenity migration began in about the 1960s, as shown by the higher net migration rates at older ages. And the pattern fluctuates somewhat over the following decades, but the general pattern of high net migration among the older age groups really persists throughout the 2000s. If we drop all decades by deselecting them under this Choose a Decade portion of the left-hand tab, we focus on 2000s, and then what we can do is actually compare Vilas County with other counties. Of course, you could have 3 counties in all decades put on this chart, but that might get a little squirrely to interpret. So we're going to keep things simple here. We'll keep Vilas County, and then let's go to Illinois and take a look at some of those examples that Rochelle was presenting to us earlier. So Illinois, and let's head to, oh, It's updating before I wanted it to. All right, Cook County, Illinois, represented here. Then we have, let's go to another Illinois county, McHenry. And again, remember that Vilas County is one of these examples of our classic amenity or recreation destinations. Cook County, home to Chicago, our urban example. And then McHenry, Illinois, is our suburb of the urban area. And what we see here are 3 different net migration signatures, which is to say that the net migration patterns across the age groups differs across these 3 different county types. Within this window, we can also save what we're seeing. We can also clear all selections and start over. But what I want to demonstrate here is that we can save this image as a PNG file. And that is the option here. We can also download these data and generate our own chart in whatever software you would prefer. All right. The last tab that I would like to show today is the download data. The central point here is that you might want to create groups of counties or regions that you want to see more specific migration patterns for, or you might want to see how these charts break down by race or ethnicity, or to see how the estimates of the numbers of net migrants rather than rates play out. And all of this is possible with the data download because we provide the components that are necessary to construct the rates visualized in the online mapping and the charting tools. So all of the information that is used to generate these maps and tools that you can fiddle with online are available to you through the download data function. So you can create your own charts, you can conduct sophisticated analyses using these data, you can generate the maps that you would like to use. There are 4 steps to downloading the net migration data. First, you have to select the counties that you want. So you can add all counties in the U.S. You can also add by county type. In addition, you can select by state, select county, etc. But what I would like to do is demonstrate, we can do all counties in the U.S. And then I would like to demonstrate another option here, which is adding by a county type. And here, we actually have linked these data to the USDA ERS county typologies. So we're actually able to identify specific types of counties. You can click here for more information on the typologies, and then we can select from this menu the different typologies available. So if we select this non-metro recreation, for example, we add this as a filter. So among all of the U.S. counties, we're actually selecting the non-metro recreation types. Advancing to the next step, we then choose the decades. Right? We can choose each of them. We can choose just the 2000s, whichever decade you prefer. When you choose a decade, the race availability automatically updates. So if we choose total, all races combined, or we can choose specific groups. Similarly, we can combine, we have our males and our females combined. We add this to our migration selection. And then we advance to the next step. And here we have another option of appending information from other data sources. So here we have available Census 2010 select variables, Census 2000, 1990, as well as ERS typology. So if we use the 2010 as an example, we can choose our population, the percentage of the population over 65. That may make sense given the non-metro recreation destination that we're thinking about here. So after choosing that, we select the step 4, and this is actually where we download the data. In selecting download the data, you get a number of files available to you in a zipped up file, including the data dictionary and codebook. You can also look at the data dictionary before exporting or downloading these data to review or for reference later. One other point here I want to make is that you can download these data from this website. You can also download the full data set for all decades in the series from ICPSR. So again, that's another option available to you through a different export function. So that concludes the demonstration of the website. And we will have time for Q&A. but I do now want to shift to a couple of points that came up in the presentation of the website, just to kind of hit them home. First, we saw this signature chart earlier, right? It shows the net migration rates by age group for Cook County, Illinois, the example of the central city or urban net migration signature. And this exact chart can be generated online through our website that I just demonstrated. However, in this other image, what we're seeing here, net migration rates that are, we're seeing here net migration rates for the different race groups by sex. So looking again at Cook County, we see the net migration rates for our Black population and white population separately by sex. This is only available by downloading the data. This map cannot be, this chart cannot be generated online. An advantage of disaggregating the net migration signatures is that we see here that positive net migration characterizing these young age groups in Cook County, Illinois is driven by our white females and white male population. Again, this chart, while very useful, cannot be generated through the website, and instead one must download the data. Similarly, while the chart on the left-hand side, presented here, shows net migration rates by age and ethnicity, an approximation of this can be generated through the website. But the chart on the right-hand side here, this chart cannot. And this one shows the net migration numbers, which, as Rochelle discusses, the difference between in-migrants and out-migrants. Right? This information is not available online. The charts on the website show net migration rates rather than the estimates of the net migration numbers. But sometimes we want these numbers, and we can get those through the downloaded data. Why might we want the rates, the numbers as opposed to the rates? Because they can be different from one another, especially for small populations, such as the Hispanic population as demonstrated here. And we actually see similar patterns for females and males in certain contexts, including, for example, counties with a military base, as in this example, or in counties with a prison. So again, the takeaway point there is that there are a couple of issues to keep in mind when using the online website. One is the availability of detailed race and ethnic and sex breakdowns are available really only through the download data function, and counts as opposed to rates are available only from the download data function. So we would like to acknowledge again our funders for their support throughout this project. Support from the NICHD and ERS was vital for generating the estimates and making them publicly available through what we hope is a user-friendly and innovative website. And with that, I would like to open it up for questions. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Rochelle and Catherine. We have had some questions come in. So some of these are more specific methodological questions, and then there's some broader questions. And I'll just take these in the order that they came. So the first one, why do you divide the estimated number of net migrants by the expected time to population rather than by the mid-period population times 10?
Yeah, I can answer that one. And really this is, I mean, it could be done either way, certainly. The midpoint of the decade is oftentimes used in constructing rates that happen over time. But the expected population, I guess the interpretation difference there is that it gives a sense of how the population changed from what it would have been without the migration, I guess, is our best interpretation of it. So, you know, we're dealing with some migrants that would be in the mix if we took the midpoint, and so the dividing it by the expected population instead sort of eliminates those migrants from that and just divides it by the original population. So it's really a preference. You could do it either way, but that's why we've chosen to use the expected.
Okay. There's a question, are vital records, birth certificates, death certificates, and so on, are they collected in methodologically comparable ways and this person gives the example of Wisconsin that collects vital records down to the county level without any sub-county geographies.
So the data that we used on the vital records were from the National Center for Health Statistics, which collects the data from the states. So the states all report the data in a relatively uniform format that the National Center for Health Statistics requests. The states then report, and then the National Center organizes those data into one data set for the country. So it is sort of this partnership between the states and the National Center. We went straight to the National Center, and actually we had the individual level data, and we aggregated it and we had individual level births, for instance, by the race of mother and father and ethnicities, and the county of residence. And so we aggregated all of those to the county of residence level. And those data we access them with a special data use agreement. They're not generally publicly available.
Okay. There's two questions here about ArcGIS, and I'll combine them into one question. The first question is, are you using ArcGIS for your maps? And the second one is, could spatial data on this website be accessed using ArcGIS online so that people could overlay their own local data?
Now I'm wishing we had Jim on the line. But so we've certainly used ArcGIS to generate maps. But on the online framework, and Jim Bowden is the web designer here, and he's the one that has done all of that interface, so he would be the best one to answer those kind of technical details. But he's using open source software to do the online programming, the online mapping. I don't even remember exactly what it is because that's not my forte. But certainly anyone could, I think to use GIS, probably the easiest thing to do is if you wanted to work in ArcGIS, would be to download the data, and then you could create whatever kind of maps and whatever kind of spatial analysis you wanted to do. And otherwise, I think I would just have to, I don't know, Catherine, if you could answer that any better, or if we just need to defer to ask you if you have an interest in that, to contact Jim Bowden, the web designer. And his contact information is available on the web page. If you click support, it'll give you a chance to email him directly if you'd like.
No, I think, Rochelle, you covered it, and basically that Jim is the go-to guy for the questions and how to generate things. But I know that as far as functionality of overlaying additional data on top of the map is concerned, no, that's not an option on this website. However, what we tried to do is make it very easy for people to put those data sets together through that download data, so that you would download a single file that contains at least variables from those data sets in a single file, to make that, at least that step in mapping easier, so that you don't have the task of having to join across data sets. The net migration estimates along with those census years.
Okay. And how were the cutoffs, cut points determined? I assume they mean on the maps. Are those quintiles that you're using, or what did you use?
It was a mix of things. So they're not exactly quintiles, because you'll see they're very even numbers. And quintiles would certainly vary depending on which variables you had selected at any point in time. And we wanted the legend to remain consistent so that people could make those comparisons, sort of going back and forth between decade to decade and between different race or ethnic groups or age groups, without have to sort of constantly readjust to what the scale was. We started with doing some quintiles for the total net migration rates for the 2000 to 2010 period to get sort of a sense of what the ranges were like. But ideally, we wanted to choose cut points that sort of had the not much change due to net migration in the middle, and then equal levels going out upward to positive net immigration and downward to negative net migration. So it was done as sort of a combination of qualitative and quantitative decisions there, and with the aim of making it easy to interpret and make comparisons.
Okay. There's a question about whether any researchers in this project have used or had any plans to use the county-to-county data sets. I assume they mean the county-to-county migration files from the Census Bureau.
I have used those data in the past, the ones associated with Census 2000. So looking at the county-to-county the county-to-county migration flows files that covered the time period 1995 to 2000. And with those data, you were able to get breakdown by some of these same characteristics, and also, like educational attainment and some other useful variables. I have not yet worked with this newest data release from the American Community Survey, the migration flows, and this was a data set that there was some uncertainty leading up to it as to whether it was even going to be available with the switch to the American Community Survey. The questions there are different, as many of you probably know. Where there were in the American Community Survey, the question is about where did you live 1 year ago, and so we're looking at just a 1 year period of time in migration. And then there are going to be some sampling issues, particularly for some of the smaller population counties, and I'm not sure the extent to which any of these demographic breakdowns are available in terms of migration for the smaller population counties in particular. Catherine, I don't know if you can answer that any better. I don't know if you have worked with those data yet.
I've not worked with those data directly. We've done some poking around, and the issue that you just mentioned is one that has come up with the small populations.
So the issue is the confidence intervals are likely to be quite high when you're dealing with small population counties, and specifically if you start to break it down by age and sex and race and ethnicity and other social and economic characteristics, and to the point where those data might not even be available for those characteristics.
Okay. There's a question, is there a breakdown between domestic and international migration?
No. So they're both lumped together here in these data. So we just know the net migration includes both domestic and international.
Are there any plans to release more racial categories for the 2000 to 2010 data? And if not, would this potentially be available upon request?
We don't have plans of releasing more. We did work with some more specific race, ethnic groups or racial groups. So what you'll see is that what we've included at this moment is non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, Hispanic, and then other. So this other category includes large numbers of people, and primarily Asians, Native Americans, and so it is most likely not. We're not planning on doing any public release with it. I can tell, and I haven't really thought much about it, but we did collect some data, particularly for the Asian group, and are pretty close, I guess, in terms of having some estimates of that. So especially if you had a question about a particular county that you were really interested in or something along those lines, you could send me an email, and I'd be happy to talk with you about it more.
Okay. And could this be expanded to include education levels?
I think that would be great. I would love to see that, but it would be very difficult to do so. So I would say no, especially because of the shift to the American Community Survey, and just in general, we don't have counts of the population by educational attainment in the same kind of way that we do of these other demographic characteristics, because the age, sex, race, and ethnicity are collected from the full census count, the summary file 1, or the short form as it used to be called. So every person is counted according to those demographic characteristics, at least as best as the Census Bureau can do. Educational attainment is a question that is left to be addressed in other surveys, in the American Community Survey, for instance, and so we have a pretty good estimate of what educational attainment is at the county level, but it's not included in those counts. And so it would be, especially when you start pairing it up with the age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, we wouldn't have good enough estimates of it to generate the migration estimates by educational attainment, as well as these other features, in a way that we feel we could provide highly accurate estimates.
Okay. There's a question about generating is it possible to generate national charts that you showed with the data? I assume they mean for some of those county level charts that you showed, would it be possible to get similar types of charts at the national level?
Not with these data, and that's because so at the national level, what you would be looking at is just the international migration, international net migration. There may be another source for something similar to that, but not with these data.
Okay. And how extensive was your adjustments for under and over counting? Was that for every county or just for specific counties?
The primary issue here is among children, is the undercount of children. That's well acknowledged in the censuses, and so that's where we had to make the biggest adjustments. So we did that for every county, because this is a common and highly observed issue that's there. And really the issue with it is that the undercount, overcount, and then there were some census errors, particularly at Census 2010, varies between the way the quality of the census, or how accurate the census was in terms of undercount and overcount, was a little bit different at Census 2000 than it was at Census 2010. And so that's why we needed to make those adjustments. If they both had a similar kind of undercount, overcount, then it would sort of balance each other out, and you wouldn't see a problem in the migration estimates. But because the way undercount and overcount varied did differ, we did need to make some adjustments. And we made those adjustments based on the post-censal survey, the coverage surveys, and demographic analysis, primarily demographic analysis, after both Census 2000 and 2010.
Okay. I think based on the time, I think we'll just have one more question here. So have you had any interest in this application from state or local policymakers? And if not, have you taken any steps to make this application available to policymakers or planners?
Catherine, do you want to take that one?
Sure, we could do that. Well, the local folks were involved in the process early on, and I don't know, Rochelle, you want to talk more about that, but we had local stakeholders identified. The UW at Wisconsin, we've got a pretty strong relationship with UW Extension, as an example. And so we identified people throughout the U.S. To, in essence, take a look at the data before we made them publicly available to make sure that they looked right and that they jived with what people were seeing on the ground. But beyond that, we're actually at Wisconsin, we're responsible for distributing or disseminating this information through Extension, both locally as well as nationally. And so we have a lot of stakeholders involved there that include county planning, urban planning, et cetera. And so we have been disseminating this information through newsletters. We have plans to present at different meetings at different levels of leadership throughout the state as well. And so some of the feedback that we've gotten since last spring has been very positive in terms of either demonstrating patterns that people suspected but didn't actually have evidence of to support particular programs. That's really been one of the major pieces of feedback that we've had, is that it helps them to make sense of what's going on in their communities in conjunction with other local information that they have, so that they can start thinking about local programming needs.
Mm-hmm. I can also say too, we just released these data in April, and so we've been trying to get the word out and get them publicized since that time. We gave a presentation at the Population Association of America meetings. We also did, Ken Johnson leaded up writing a policy brief that was published by the Carsey Institute at the University of New Hampshire that came out in April that is aimed more at planners and policymakers. And we also worked with the press a little bit to get some recognition of this work and just sort of raise awareness. There was an article published in USA Today when the data came out, and I think some reference in the Wall Street Journal as well. So we're trying to work through the press to get more information out there, and then also through these networks, primarily through Extension. And that's a big part of the reason why we wanted to do this webinar today, is just to let more people know about the data and get some feedback about how people are using them and how we can make them more useful.
Great. Well, Rochelle, Catherine, are there any additional comments that you had?
I'd just like to thank everyone for taking the time to sit down and listen to us and engage with us and ask some great questions.
I'd like to echo that, and then also invite you to be in touch with us with more questions offline as you start to play with the data and play with the website. And as questions come up, don't hesitate to be in touch with one of us.
Yes, and if you find something that's particularly useful, or you're using this for an application that we might not have thought of, or you just have a great story about it or something like that, we would love to hear it. And we'd love to collect those stories and maybe even share them on the website if there's something that you feel would work that way.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time to talk about this great resource. This concludes today's webinar. I want to remind everyone to fill out the survey and thank everyone for attending. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. Bye-bye.